I just wanted to invite you to plant the seed in your mind and see when I think about designing a project, think more about what will be the impact, how are going to use that. And for nutritionists, producers, most of the times that will be income over feed costs, mortality, those sort of things, right? So then the next thing is okay. So if that's the final goal on how I'm going to use that in the actual farm for the producer, right? Because if the producer is profitable, then the producer will be in business for longer, right?
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Swine at Canada podcast. I am Dan Columbus, and I will be your host for today's episode. And I have a returning guest with me today, Dr. Fabian Chamba, who is co-owner and co-manager of Granja Barrera. So welcome again to the show.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here with you again.
Yeah. So I know you've been on before, but just to remind our listeners who you are and where you come from, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself again.
Sure. Yes, Fabian, a veterinarian from Ecuador, got my Ph.D. in Minnesota and working with pigs the last 15 years of my life doing several things, research, production, reproduction, research again, and some tech services too in the US and in Canada. And now a lot more interested in the history of science and research and stats, and that's why we are going to talk a little bit today.
Yeah. So that's good. You introduced the topic for me, makes my job easier. So you did mention that you've been reading a lot more in the history, and I think you have an interesting perspective because you've done research from both sides of it now, the academic and the industry side. So we could just get right into it. You know, what have you been kind of reading about, and where do you think we can make an improvements?
Sure, yeah. Well, this actually started back when was in Minnesota doing my PhD. So I was taking stat classes, which for vets, I imagine that is like, man, oh man, I mean, you have to suffer really in those classes. For vets, we are not good at numbers. And that's kind of the the majority of people, let's say. So so what happened then is like I started to understand it more and more. So I took a lot of classes and credits, advanced EPI, advanced biostats, and all of those things that you can imagine. Lots of classes. And after several years and working on my projects, so then I started thinking like it seems like we are kind of putting a lot of weight on the p values to decide on something that perhaps should have been the expertise of the researcher or the producer or the nutritionist. And as well, like, yeah, there's gotta be a way that we can do better. I don't think that the 0.05 or zero point 0.1 threshold feels to me like from where it's coming. Like it's the Fisher when he started all of these methods and proposals 100 years ago. He was like, okay, I think the 0.05 is this is the culprit. We need to get everything that is below this is going to be replicable. And say, okay. So then I realized that I think there's gotta be a good way. So being an epidemiologist and a really deep into the epidemiology, I realized, oh, actually there is something called causal inference, and that's a combination of stats and expertise, which is when you combine stats and expertise, then that's called a science according to history. And then I said, okay, then stats is actually a tool to serve the purpose of a science, not reverse on how we tend to do it right now. We put, it's kind of feels to me like we avoid the responsibility of interpreting the biology behind what we do and just put it in the number, which is a p-value, and then forget about the process, forget about what it really means, right? And I'm not saying like everybody's doing that out there, and you have all the spectrum outside, but I think today I just wanted to invite you to plant the seed in your mind and see when I think about designing a project, think more about what will be the impact, how are going to use that. And for nutritionists, producers, most of the times that will be income over feed costs, mortality, those sort of things, right? So then the next thing is okay. So if that's the final goal on how I'm going to use that in the actual farm for the producer, right? Because if the producer is profitable, then the producer will be in business for longer, right? So I will have a job. So that's right. That's one of the things. So I was thinking like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Then things like if I am testing a vaccine, for example, then mortality will be one of my main goals out of that study, right? If I'm testing a probiotic or a prebiotic, whatever it is the additive, then it will be income over feed cost, right? Because the product has a cost. It's not like if I'm putting a product, right? And then I have improvement in average daily gain feed conversion ratio, but okay, I expend extra money on that product. So is the benefit actually paying the actual product, or is giving me more, or what's happening there, right? So I feel like we need to kind of take it to the next step, thinking about how I'm going to go to the farm and solve a problem based on my research.
Yeah, it's interesting the p-value thing because I've seen this more and more often. I don't know how we fight back against the peer review process and the journals that are clearly still very much on the p-value, and it does allow for researchers and students and everything to almost be a little bit lazy about the data to be like, let's let the p-value tell us what's significant instead of looking at, okay, but I have this huge increase in average daily gain or something, but the p-value isn't there, and so we just ignore it, right? So uh, I don't know if I have suggestions for where to go with the p-value. I mean, and try to teach that it is just an indicator. Um, but again, when you go to publish, how do you get around that you have a world of academics out there that are still very much reliant on that p-value?
Exactly, and I got papers rejected myself because of that, because I'm proposing, right? Let's say, well, the first step for me is like we need that our trainees, which are grad students or undergrad students, we need to teach them to think about causality, right? So we make the diagram, so we put here, I don't know, probiotic X average daily gain or field conversion ratio, and then we draw the lines and the direction of the line in the arrow is the causality. And then after that, I decide on the statistical method I'm going to use. And then that's where the key change needs to happen is where we need to use methods that allows to include that complexity. And with ANOVAs, I don't think we can accomplish that. So we need something like maybe probabilistic inference, which is Bayesian methods. And Bayesian methods is not about using or not using the p-value, but it's making the best you can with the complexity of the other cofactors that you have in there and the replicability that you have itself in there to estimate your average treatment difference or your means or medians, whatever you're trying to accomplish, or mortality percentage, whatever it is. And then, so based on that, so that's your way that you can get around the p-value thing, because now you have a 2% difference in mortality and you put economic value on that. Then you say, well, this 2% and the confidence interval that is around that is kind of away from the other one, right? So there is a difference in there and there is an economic value on that. So I'm not relying on the p-value thing to kind of to think about that. So if we start training other researchers and the curriculum, we need to include classes that teach causal inference and this type of methods that serves the causal question, not the other way. So we kind of get away from the training in the typical way, let's say in a traditional way. We need to avoid keep training our grad students in that way. And I think you remember in the same circle, the reviewers in the panels for the grants are the same researchers, right? So that's a little bit of a conflict of interest in my view. but but I think that's where we can start, bringing the change, because now the reviewers will understand causality, replicability, Bayesian inference, and all of those things. So then and say, okay, if it's Bayesian, then it looks good. So then let's get the money for that.
Yeah, I'm wondering too if maybe focusing on that a little bit more than just the p-values would also potentially help with this bias towards publishing positive results, right? And only those studies where you have your p less than 0.05 and ignoring the ones where you don't see anything.
Exactly. And reviewers are researchers too, right? So as as we continue training those new grads, I think they will become the new peer reviewers in the journals, and they will understand that process. So yes, the publication bias. Oh my God, yeah, I I got rejected papers for that too.
Yeah. No, I think it definitely comes with the training and how we change that. But you need to train the people that are doing the training need to adjust that too, right? I know when I'm doing my students and they're looking at their data, I teach them like tell what's the story, right? Where's the story? How does your data fit in there? So even if things aren't necessarily all significant, are they all going in the same direction and or like something that makes sense?
Exactly. I think we're forgetting a little bit about history, and I think history we should have in the curriculum too, history of science, because it's not about stats actually. It's more about the thinking process of getting to that place where you say, this is my problem or my questions that I need to answer, and this is the process
Yeah.
how I'm going to get generate the data. Generating the data is just the process to get to the final goal of solving the problem or answering the question. And I think that's what has been lost a little bit in our times, and I feel guilty too because I've been part of that too. But I'm kind of now kind of realizing like, God, I think we need to kind of learn from history and make a little bit of change here.
Yeah. I mean, kind of all, along those lines, though, too, is also teaching people like what, when you're determining the outcomes that you're measuring or when you're studying your design, are you putting any thought into whether those measures are the ones to actually measure, let alone if they are the ones that are going to have the benefit at the end, right? Like you said, measuring economic output or something, something like that. But even when you're looking at measures of gut health or whatever, right? Like, is that where you need to be focusing? And I think there's a little bit of what's limiting in that. And sometimes even let's just do every analysis we can think of and see what we get, right?
And I think that's where I think the training comes again because then the reviewer panels in those funding agencies. That's where I think they can outweight things that are focused on what matters, right? For producers, veterinarians, and nutritionists, it will tend to be about the same indicators, right? So it's not very difficult to grasp which ones will be. But you're right. I think research overload, which is I try to do a lot with one study and I cramp it with a lot of questions and then I get lost and I get into the trap of p hacking and what will
Hmm.
happen if I change this thing over here and then do the other thing. And I think setting that a priori will be the solution because now your brain is thinking on, okay, this is my question, and the rest of things are just a tool to fulfill that goal, right?
I was just gonna say, I think that more of that emphasis on why are you doing this and less on what you're doing, right? And I've even had it where I've been a judge in like poster or oral competitions, and I like to ask, like, so why are you doing this, right? What is the final impact that you're trying to get? And the number of times that students have no answer to that question, I'm like, how are you doing this and not understand or want to know why you're doing it, you know?
Exactly. Put it another way, how I normally train my team in research back in my days when I was doing research. Now I'm not doing research anymore. But I was telling them, okay, they were kind of trying to figure it out what to focus on, right? Which will be my indicators. And I say, well, think about what are you're going to try to solve in the farm. How you're going to use this on the farm to solve the problem. And that's
Yeah,
and that's your answer. It's not normally most of the times it's really simple.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that differs depending on where the research is being done, or yeah, I'm kind of thinking, academic versus the applied or industry research and whether or not that question changes?
It might be, but I think we need both working together because there are things like challenge studies that definitely we cannot do it in normal farms. But in some diseases you can. There are some people doing it, but there are others that, like you can do it in the field. And I think that's where another point that I want to make today is field research doesn't mean is bad, right? We and comes again, if you understand what you're trying to do, You understand which cofactors are important. Like for example, for feed conversion ratio, start weights, end weights, right? Number of pigs in the pens, those type of things, maybe density, and those type of things are that are going to impact your indicator, right?
Hmm.
So then you if you control well for that in your field study, then you got it. I mean, those studies can be cheaper and even better than control studies in the university, because that's university tends to be a little more expensive, but I think the university studies have another place, right, for to complement
Yeah.
what we do in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes me think where there's certain times where, you know, the academic research is going to show the effects, say, on the gut or the immune system or something, but there's not really that effect on growth. There's not a positive effect on growth. But it kind of comes back to, so that then we get the question all the time. Well, you're not going to see an effect in the nursery in your growth performance, but the pigs are better off. And then people will be like, but aren't we about growth? And you're like, yeah, but if your pig dies afterwards or is suffering because you didn't focus on gut development, how good is your growth going to be? It kind of comes back to your vaccine example, right? If you're measuring growth performance in a vaccine, but you ignore the mortality question.
Exactly. And I think those things can be handled together, and that's what I want to bring today too, is like exactly your primary outcome will be something economic, something production for the producer, and then as a secondary one you understand the mechanism, right? So they say if they die less or if they grow slower, is that related to the gut health, right? But you have the full picture, right? So,
Hmm.
but you focus on what if this is something happening in here, then it will be translated in the economics and the production data. Otherwise, we don't have the complete picture, right? We cannot answer the question fully, I guess.
Another thing that would be interesting is, when you come to funding and the peer reviewed process, I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit, but where biases and social norms come into play and like where they could be potentially positive and negative.
Oh my God, yeah, human animals. We go by the crowd, right? And I think few people have the courage to be disliked or to challenge the status quo, and it's not a good place to be, right? And also a lot of that I think is the let's say maybe the lack of understanding or the lack of education somehow. Again, it comes back to training again, and I'm sorry for being like a broken record on that. But it comes back to that. But yes, I mean, it's human nature. I think as we go forward, we will. Science corrects itself. If you look at the history, science corrects itself, so we will go forward and understand like, oh, this thing is not replicable. So I we better act on that. And there is not a replicability crisis, but there is a lot of what I call the one study fallacy. So
Hmm.
we run a study one time and then we run away with that and say this is going to save the world. And well, wait a minute, we really understand the biology behind that. So can we do it in another farm and we get the same results? Yeah, that's why we need. And I like in Europe sometimes the regulatory agencies they ask for 2 or 3 times to replicate the studies, and I like that. And here the regulatory in the US, the regulatory also asks for 2 or 3 replicates of the same thing because of
Hmm.
the same exact reason, right? Because if it works 2 or 3 times, then you have a lot more confidence that it's going to work. And I can tell you when we do these studies, especially on preventing mortality, boy oh boy, this molecule or this vitamin, man, that saves a lot of pigs. And then you do it again and it's the other way, and then you do it again and maybe they are level. And I say, okay, that's the power of replication.
Yeah. Well, that's where meta-analyses come in, right? And I think are helpful, but I think they also have that issue, especially when you're doing meta-analyses, that there is a bias to publish those positive results. So what is going into your meta-analyses might also be about biasing your analysis, right?
Exactly. And I think if you are, I mean, you are listening to this and you are, I've been peer reviewer in several journals, and I invite them to actually omit p-values. Don't put the p-values. Try to estimate the best you can the actual effect of what you're
Hmm.
trying to do, and include cofactors. So if you are going to do peer review, maybe you have the chance, touch the topic, try to discuss and see how we can avoid this bias. Because I prefer negative results. And sometimes it's actually funny because sometimes you see publications in where the good things are kind of the main outcome or the main thing that you talk about. But I look between the lines, I'm looking in the behind the things, and then you see, oh, actually there is something else in here that didn't work. So I learned a lot from those things because normally you don't focus on that because we like, the fame, we like, to be the compliments, we like to be on the spot because the p-value was good, so significant. This is quite a discovery. But we learn a lot more from the negative results, actually. We need the negative results. It will save a
Yeah.
lot of money. It will save a lot of work to you as a researcher because you can avoid those mistakes and save a lot of money and time for you.
Yeah, no, I'm a big proponent of having my students publish their stuff, even if it doesn't go with what was expected or what is out there, and making that it's harder to do that because people like to see the positive stuff. But I think that stuff needs to get out there too. Because and I would encourage when people are writing their discussions to make sure that you are citing the papers that don't agree with you as well in your discussion. One of the things that I tell my students all the time is one of my masters I did phytase work and phosphorus, and we showed no effect on growth and no effect on any like with anything else with the pigs. And that paper never gets cited because it doesn't go with what is out there and what is expected for phytase. But it needed to be out there, and more people need to publish that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if we have time, but now that you point on the meta-analysis, actually, right now, veterinarians, nutritionists, researchers are in general really busy lives, right? So the time to read is not really a bit because you're busy in other stuff, right? Writing grants, reviewing papers, working with the students, and writing papers to publish. So other tasks are priority. I think one of the main points that we used to work a lot with my groups in research was to do this review of the literature exhaustive. And now you have Gemini from Google that it can give you the table with all the KPIs that you need in a table already. So you just ask for that and it will look for the papers, give you the table, and it saves you a lot of time. I mean, you have the review paper already there in few seconds. I mean, you have to kind of cross check those references because those models are just
Yeah.
glued together, so pieces from everywhere, right? But if we understand as much as we can all the available information, we save a lot of headaches later in our projects. That will help us a lot, and that's I
Yeah.
see that's a common mistake also in a lot of researchers.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look up that tool because might make we're getting more and more into meta-analyses, but it is very time consuming to go through and to get all the papers and the information and everything. So as much as I'd rather have my students go and make sure that they read everything, anything that can make it easier is probably a good thing. So well, we're getting close to the end of the time, so just probably can guess what your take-home message is going to be, but I'll ask you to just give our audience a take-home message that you want them to get from this episode.
Yeah, my take home will be, well, give it a thought, give it a chance. I think these few ideas about put a science first before statistics. Think about your problem, think about biology and production. Expose your students to not just production things, right? Send them to farms, but also when we train them about science, I think before statistics, we have to train them on the why as you described it, and also on better methods to kind of accommodate those complex models that we have in these days. Because now we have a lot of cofactors influencing those things, and we need to accommodate better methods, Bayesian methods. This is not about actually a war because there was never a war of between Fisherians and Bayesian statistics really, because they too intertwine across in history that they both had good things that they work together actually, and I think if we get to the probabilistic models, we will get in a better place for inference.
Yeah, no, great message.
It's time for our famous three. The Nutrition Athena, Shakespeare Mill, Farmhouse, and Nutrition Partners Nutrition Group offer the full range of nutritional product based on extensive research and developments, and a solid team of experts all across Canada. Our objective is to provide cost-effective solutions, innovation, and support to producer from the entire Canadian swine industry.
So before I let you go, I know we asked you the 3 questions before, but it's been a while, so maybe your answers will be different now. So I'll ask them again. The first question is, a favorite swine or agriculture-related resource.
Swine it.
Swine it? Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, I use it a lot.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, great. I think podcasts are amazing, and I will just tell the audience that we did not pay him to say that. That is that is all on him. So, and then our next one is, a favorite book, or let's just do a book recommendation, maybe something that you've read recently that you would recommend to the audience.
Yeah, about history of science, and I think you will enjoy it. It's a little long, but it's called, and I really enjoyed it, learning a lot about Pearson, Fisher, how they taught, what they lived to get to these stats that we use right now in most of the places, right? So Clayton Audrey, a statistician, a mathematician actually, that works a lot on probabilities, and he was in a place where he was asking questions like, I thought I know probabilities, but I didn't. And I started digging into what is probability, and I ended up, researching more than anyone in this planet about the history of probability. And the book, The Bernoulli's Fallacy, is just about that. It's how what Fisher and Pearson created 100 years ago became the norm these days, and how that can be a little dangerous if we want to do better inference and better science these days. So we need to kind of start rethinking statistics and science, actually.
Yeah. And then our last one is, a characteristic that you think makes for a particularly successful producer or leader.
Resourcefulness. I mean, you have your nutritionist, your veterinarian, so your peers. So working as a team, looking for the strengths in each of them. I think the things that you cannot do, then that's, I think, where people are successful, I guess.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Well, I'll thank you again for coming on the show. I'm sure we'll have you on again because it's always a great conversation when you come on. So thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.